Welcome to Renaissance Charge Videos. My name is Friedrich, and I have a very special video today. Announcement and several announcements. What I want to do is start an actual, I want to write the Don Smith book. I am a writer and editor, and there's a need to properly process Don Smith's material, both for historical reasons, setting the record straight, and also for the immensely practical purposes as well. So I have two different interests in doing that, and the other thing that we would like to do is build a course with this book, and we want to talk about that in this video. So first of all, those of you who are familiar with Don Smith, you have to understand that you only have part of the information that he actually presented publicly, and of course there's no doubt a whole lot more information that was not shared with the public, and that's not what we're getting into. But I have a lot more information here, and this is going to appear in a work which I'm going to call, this series is Don Smith Resonance Energy Crafting Systematic Index. That's kind of what I'm trying to imply and what my agenda is. So what we want to do is not only reveal in one publication, which could be hundreds of, well, it will be hundreds of pages long, all the material in all the various editions of his books, which I have here. There may be a few more that were slightly different, I'm not sure. So I'm asking for people to send information if you have primary source material, to send them in. So what we're looking to do is show all that material and then index it. So, you know, he covered this point over here and this point over there, and he explained a little bit more here and a little bit more over there. And so what we want to do is take all the Don Smith videos, which I have 3 more videos that are not on the YouTube or anywhere else on the internet, 94 and 95 conference videos, and we want to go through an index at particular minute, second points when he talked about this subject or that subject. This is important if you want to get the big picture, and it's going to take a lot of work for me to do this. I've been pretty heavily into this research for a while now, and have a very good understanding of it, and I am able to replicate it. This is just a simple demo here, where we are taking one of his patent processes and showing it at the very basic level. And we're collecting the heavy side flow, which I showed in another video. So this is more of the idea, and this is more of what we're going to teach in this book and get into in my book here on resonance. So I'll turn this off now because I don't need all that on, except I did have a frequency generator here. Or a frequency counter. but you can see the frequency on here, 25K. Anyway, not important point. We've got, of course, this one, the other system here, and so we want to talk about all these, well, these details. So everything on the table has something significant. Of course, this one may be the big shocker here. Is one of the biggest induction coils you ever see. Big, huge interrupter here. It works. So I'll demonstrate that one day with the Benitez project. So what we want to do is, like I said, go through Don Smith's material and properly process it. And the reason is, well, before I get into the reasons, just to give you the scope, what we want to do is have a course from beginning to, there won't be probably ever an end to it, it'll probably be open-ended. The sky's the limit with this technology, but we'll go through step by step. I've experienced doing this with other related technologies in the past. I started multiple online email discussion group forums where we had goals, and we had a builders project, and we had directions and all that, and that worked out very well. In many respects, there was thousands of people involved with that. This was many years ago. So I have experience with that. I've also monitored many forums since then, and we're going to talk about that as well, the need for something. And I, again, talked to thousands of people all over the world in these many years in this technology, and I find that people who are trying to, I guess the term is dabble in energy crafting, alternative energy crafting, they have a problem with trying to find out where to begin, or what's a viable solution, and where should they study. So what I want to do is create a proper method of research, thorough method, and not this sloppy work that is so often the case in this research. There are people who are at this 15, 20, 30 years, and they're not really any better off. They've wasted so many years. They don't know what to do. They don't really know where to begin. So we started that with this book here. This is kind of like the primer to Don Smith's type of systems. It's the resonance, understanding resonance, and it will always be a key resource. You don't really need anything more than that book to do whatever you need to do. But that's kind of a primer to the Don Smith specific systems. And how that happened was, we'll go over that a little bit here. So Don Smith, and I'll go over this more in the publication, Don Smith shares in his videos his history. He was a scientist in geology, I guess, and other studies, and came to see the energy in the ground. And at some point in the, I guess, late 80s, mid 80s, he was out of work and started teaching high school science and various others. And he started with this kit here, which is what we've built upon and improved. And he started to realize that, you could, so this is the original instructions to the kit. So you could have more output than input through basic radio transmission. But in this case, it's power transmission, not radio signal. And so when he realized that, the people were saying to him that, hey, this is Tesla stuff, then he went back and figured that out, got all the books he could find. And I think it was probably several years of probably intense research, and then he started building systems, and you see the various models. And so I found that fascinating, and I found everything with Don Smith checked out. And everything that I've tried to accomplish through his instructions has worked out. Now, I haven't tried everything, but he was the real deal. I didn't know him personally, but I know 3 people that have known him fairly well, or well enough, and a couple of them were in his home and saw all the models that you see in the pictures. And so one of them is Alex, customer friend of mine, and this is one of the manuals from Don Smith where he signed it and said, my friend Alex, Don Smith, the 5th of September 1998. So Alex has been a student of Don Smith and has all these original publications and went to those early meetings back 20 plus years ago now. So he was an eyewitness of all these things and a friend. He was kind enough to lend me these materials so I could fully process them and set the record straight, because what has happened is with a lot of these different inventors and significant players in this work is that they have been their story has been changed by others, and their publications have been corrupted in various sophisticated ways. So with Don Smith, you have him being misrepresented by Patrick Kelly in his Free Energy book, which is, most people probably consider that a wealth of information, but they don't look at the fine point details. My expertise is in editing and publishing old material, and so we're going to do a real good job of the Don Smith research, and so I tracked how publishers have changed historically important people's words, and it's kind of like a revisionist history. So I have very carefully tracked that with in religious matters, figures, people who were important in American history, English history, where their words were changed by publishers, and I tracked the different changes. So I was noticing the same thing within the energy world here, and I noticed that with Patrick Kelly and others misrepresented Don Smith in their presentation of him. And this carries on to various the 2 big forums that exist on the subject, named after Don Smith, have continued that tradition in a very sophisticated way. The way they mislead you to prevent you from learning this knowledge is by overwhelming you with information and then slipping in things that are false here and there. And then in the end, they say, oh, we've got, like this one individual and group of people all together, they're a team apparently, they had slipped in there and said, oh, we're providing you with primary source documents for Don Smith, and then they say, well, we're going to try and replicate this. even though their source had already affirmed that they had replicated it. And then they proceeded to eventually say, oh, it doesn't work, there's nothing there, don't worry about it. So they effectively convinced the public that there's nothing to pursue, which is ludicrous. I mean, if you listen to Don Smith at all, read any of the book that's even available, you can very quickly demonstrate these things. And this is what we did with the kit. We made, at the very beginning, this is where he says to start, understand resonance. So before we get back into that, specifically, I just want to continue on in the need for this work to be done, an honest work, and to avoid these trolls and misinformationists who, personally I think that they don't want the public to really know this, but I think a lot of times it's private companies and people who want the technology for themselves. They don't want other people, because they want to have control over it, they want to profit from it, and don't want others to profit from it. So, I've always been an open source guy, and I want the public to have access to what Don Smith presented, and I think it's important that people aren't misrepresented. So that's kind of some of my motivation. I'm always upset when I see, especially people that have important significance, and Don Smith's work was very important, I think. So I want to correct that, if I can, in a very thorough publication and series of publications, starting with the next videos will be labeled the same number with, or the same title with a number 1, 2, 3, following it in the order of the videos. So we'll put the videos online, and then we'll index those according to their timestamp in the publication. So then you can make sense of it all. Now, you can make sense of it watching it, but there's a need for systematization, organization, and beginning and progressing through. And this is what we did in the book here. In the kit, we made it so that you start with chapter 1, and then, which is the more of the loop system of resonance, understanding resonance, and the basic application. And then we went to the second chapter, one wire transfer of power with resonance system, Tesla system, and then we went from there to the wireless. So we progressed. We provided a format where you could do the basics and stay in the section 1 of the book, and then you can go into extensive foot or endnotes, which makes up the majority of the book for the advanced studies. And so that it still has the tendency to kind of overwhelm you with information, which I want to avoid. I want to narrow it down so that literally, in the end, everybody can just take apart an old TV and make it work for you. I'm not trying to make people dependent upon others at all. This whole idea is to create independence, self-sufficiency as much as possible. And my end goal this is in the context of a bigger context of trying to encourage people to be healthier, more independent, and be able to think for themselves and be useful without having to spend a whole lot of money. Like, we have it all wrong with the school systems where we start off not learning properly, not even learning how to think, memorizing things, cramming things into our head. Then we go on from there with this huge debt, right? That's not the way to start off our lives. So what I want to encourage is a different kind of school idea, along the lines of like homeschooling type of thing, but But this is just an example of that, where we're going to have a course that's not credited, that you can work through, or a series of courses that you can be involved with. And then we're going to have the meetings. I think we'll have probably about six meetings around the country all year round. So we'll have, like, the next meeting is going to be in North Carolina, and then we'll go to California, and I think we'll repeat the California and the Michigan meetings here and there every 6 months, and then we'll have in other places around the country another set of meetings. So I'll give an opportunity for people to see these things, demonstrate and talk with others, which is really valuable, small meetings where people can do that, and then network together and so forth. But we'll have the forums and the capability of having some limited interaction. The more extensive you try and make it, the more troublemakers appear and all that. We're going to avoid all that and keep it simple, and yet give people an opportunity to interact with each other on their own, and we'll have this system organized in that way. So that's what we're moving towards. And I keep looking at, these are some of the new coils that we'll be making and showing at the convention, the next 2 conventions, and there'll be some other ones as well. And you can see there's one right here. That's another whole story we won't talk about right now. But those who are familiar with Don Smith will recognize what that is, because it's exactly the exact specifications. Anyway, let's go on. Again, the problem with the groups online and trying to figure this stuff out is the way we're taught today is very disorganized, and people have a hard time working through things. They're looking for the quick fix. That's how they've been brought up. And I know, because I talked to thousands of people over the years about this technology, and I know a lot of people, they can talk the talk. I just deleted a guy on YouTube that I was going back and forth with, and he definitely could talk the talk, but when you look at his videos, I can evaluate whether somebody knows what they're talking about or not. But you can see these people, they get the lingo, they get the ideas more or less. Some of them really think they have something and they act like it. Others, they're humble and they have somewhat of a grasp, but they just don't know really what to do. And ultimately people want a plug-and-play system. And so what I'm trying to do is, I do provide plug-and-play systems. I've been doing that for a long time, over 10 years, maybe 12 years now or something, which has been a growing experience that I never intended to do. But I have been asked to do these kinds of things repeatedly, and nobody else is doing them. I don't find people really doing this sort of thing, and if they are, tell me about it, because I've looked and I see a whole bunch of con artists. I see a whole bunch of people that think they have something they don't. They're deceiving themselves, and so I feel compelled to do this, and that's what people have asked for. So, but again, the problem is these groups are set up to overwhelm you with information, so that most of the people don't know really what to do. They read this comment, they read that. This guy sounds like he knows what he's doing, so they go and they buy these parts, and then there's either something missing, or it was, deliberately a snare for you to follow, all this stuff. So So anyway, that's my point, is I want to avoid that. I want to create a beginning and end. And the other thing is, the point is I don't want to create dogmatic science. I don't want to say, hey, this is the exact theory, fall in line with it or else. That's the way the establishment is. If you don't accept our laws and limitations, then you're not part of our society, I guess, which is fine. I think there's a move away from that now, because this generation's kind of like doesn't really care about that anymore. So people are more interested in the practical things that work. And so Don Smith was the perfect example of that. He wasn't trained in electronics. He became self-taught. But in the one video, you can see where he actually shows that he had a neighbor that was, and so I always knew that he would have had somebody else besides himself that was really helping him out. But you can see in this publication, you'll see in all these pages here, all the details that he shares, and that are not online right now. You can't see them. They're not uploaded. So here's an actual diagram of one of the systems. I'm not going to show it right now because I want to do it properly. But this is something that was sent to Alex by Don Smith personally. And it's showing you all the details. So you can look forward to that later on. So anyway, there's a lot of information to sort through, but again, the point is so what? You throw a bunch of information out there and people are like, what am I going to do with it? Right? They don't know the beginning and the end. Now, I've been at this for quite a while, and I've also worked with various people that knew these more famous inventors. Like obviously I worked with Bedini for years, and not that I think too highly of Bedini, but he did know a lot of things because of others, and being in that community for a while, I got to meet some very interesting people from all over the world, and still do because of that. And so there's all these other inventors like Newman and Robert Adams and various other people that I've known, people that have worked with them more or less, and got to a chance to see kind of the inside of all of these different types of inventors, and knowing about their commercial transactions and so forth, and all the problems associated, the obstacles, and it's no easy thing to figure out. But with Don Smith, I never was involved when he was alive with him, just a bit before my time in all this. But yeah, I think it's very important to get this information out. And so let's talk about, oh yeah, the point was I was going towards, and I just kind of got off track there for a minute, was in his videos he does say, he does have a progressive presentation, but it needs to be organized more in a way that boils it down. So I'm going to present all of this stuff, and then I'm going to bring out what he was teaching about in probably a more effective manner. So you have to look at each part as a module. The battery with the high voltage module the little battery running the system. Excuse me. That would be considered a module. You know, the high frequency module with the battery. You got to look at that as a separate unit, and then you go from there to the next stage of the process. So in this case, you've got this being the high frequency module, and then this being the capacitor. And then, so you got to look at the capacitor with associated diodes. These are big, huge diodes here. They're huge, like 4 amp, 15,000 volt diodes here. And then its associated parts as another module. And how they interact is what people are trying to figure out. And then how they interact with the ground system, and then the final output, you know, transformer or battery. These are all separate things that you have to look at separately. And actually, you look at from the back towards the beginning. You start off with what you want to do, and you gather the parts accordingly to the beginning. So anyway, it needs to be brought out what's important, what's not, so that you're not having to say, I got to figure out everything in order to figure this out. I'm trying to do that for you. Not that I claim that I'll be able to figure out everything necessarily, but what I'm trying to do is sort through it all and show the options, show the different things that you can do. And you know, simpler ways of doing it. I think there's a good number of inventors over the last 100 years who have tried to, you know, own a technology and patent it and make it complicated enough that it's not easy to replicate, so that they can have some control over it. I'm trying to do the opposite of that. I think Don Smith was, in the way he presented things, was an off-the-shelf type of guy. Now, he obviously went to much higher levels, much higher outputs, but that's not for the general public. It's too dangerous and more power than you need. So what we're looking at is trying to make things, you know, easy enough to do. So that's the whole plan. We'll see how it progresses. You know, I could use help in doing this. Trying to do this is costly, it takes a lot of time, and I am going to charge for my results, you know, in a publication. But the more help I get, the better. You know, so if people want to help out in different ways, if you have any materials that you think I might not have, you know, contact me, let me know. It's so interesting, the people that you meet up with, you know, and you see them in these old videos, they're like, oh wow, there you were like 24 years ago in that video. So forth. So yeah, so there's a lot of information again to not just present, but also to index and then systematize into a big whole and say, okay, so how does the energy really work? And so in the end, we want to be able to create a system that's just so simple that you can tap off of it with very little parts. And I think those of you who have read what does exist from Don Smith, you can see, you get that idea. But what is it? What is it about the ground that's so important? What is it about resonance that's so important? What is it that makes, what's the most critical part? What's not important? What's optional? You find in several of his videos he says, people expect that the L1 and L2 coil but it wasn't necessary. The spark gap's not necessary. This is not necessary. That's not necessary. And you can all do it with regular electronics nowadays, if you figured it out. So there's not just one way of doing it, but there is central ideas, and this is where in my book, I think it's some 27 words long or something, and in the fuller description or subtitle is all the themes in this book that are important. And this book and its title are for those who buy the kit. I'm not making that online or anything like that. There's no PDF or anything. But anyway, it's about energy crafting as part of the title. And so there's various themes that I've been presenting over the years, and this is an organized way of presenting those themes. So I'd like to do the same thing, because this was inspired by Don Smith in the first kit that he recommended to do. Like I said, is right here, the instructions. But when we went to, at first we were like, okay, well good, we'll recommend that, and then they were selling it for $280, and it was a pretty cheesy, thing that you didn't get the frequency generator, so I was hardly going to promote something that would cost so much, and didn't really give you any information on what you really need to know about crafting energy with resonance. So this was something that we needed to do, and make it entirely different and practical. So we want to do the same thing. So this is like almost like a volume 1. So it's in the resonance loving path resource, and in the larger scale of presentations that I've been doing on selfish circuits, loving paths, showing the idea of true open loops and energy gain systems that are not destructive, dangerous. Well, they can be dangerous if you don't deal with them properly, but that are non-polluting, and that they are highly, more than just efficient. So they're true negative resistance systems. So they're not just the regular negative resistance where you have more efficiency in your curves, but they go truly negative. In other words, there's more output than input. So this is very easy to see in our little kit, where we have so many, on the input power, we have so many amps and volts with the frequency generator. I often show with my power supply, and you can see the power supply go backwards as energy is coming into the power supply, or you can use a 9-volt battery or whatever, which we have a plug for in the kit. But then you can multiply the energy out in various ways in this kit, and that's what we're showing the sky's limit. So in the idea of the Q, the quality factor in the series or parallel tank circuit with an inductor, capacitor, and or resistor, you have, according to the quality factor, the gain, the multiplication of the energy circulating in those parts. And if you know how to pull it out, that's what most people haven't understood. Okay, they've got it, it's almost like a noise that they can't do anything with because they don't understand high voltage, high frequency, or how the true open loop system works. We show that in the book so that you can, not only see it at a safe, very low power level, but that you can see how much you could really pull out of it. With these coils, you can easily see 100 times more out of energy from the input, if you know how to appreciate it, I suppose. With these bigger coils, these are more like 1,000 Q. Depending on, you can see these big capacitors out here. These big capacitors, are much more expensive and much higher Q. So with one of those capacitors, I was able to do, with this, the same input as the little kit, about 1,000 times more output. Just with one coil, right? So it's all there in understanding of basic resonance. It's not really that hard, and it's a key word. So if I was to ask the thousands of people that go through all these forums what they know about resonance practically, almost everyone can't really, even though they can have it, they can have some kind of answer to you. If you were to say, okay, now demonstrate to me what you're saying, for those of you who can explain the benefits of resonance or the capabilities of it, and then one will make one excuse after another as to why, well, they don't really understand it. They haven't really grasped it for one reason or another. So that's why I realized we've got to nail this point down, because it's essential. And that's why people don't understand Don Smith. They don't get what's happening with resonance in the local environment. Now, whether you believe in Don Smith's electrical theory of electrons isn't important. He has a model, it worked for him. Whether it was accurate or not is not my concern. I don't really have an opinion because I can't see these things, so I'm not an expert enough to speculate. It doesn't really matter what we speculate anyway. But I'm more of a, your technician, your practical guy that says, all right, I know how it works in the practical sense. I know how to make it work. That's what I've always been about. And that's mostly what I'm concerned with. The math has some importance, but not the type of math that these people revel in, and they look down at others because you don't know this other type of math. Does it really matter to have all this advanced math if you can't even make it do these systems here? Like we have quite a few different systems here that can produce enormous power. And that's from, here's a guy who is not a mathematician, but I can make it work. And I'm trying to tell you that you don't need to spend a whole lot of time, money, trying to figure all these things out when the processes are a lot simpler. But the problem is we come with all this baggage, what we've been told, what we've been limited to, and it's hard for us to accept that. Even for me, it's still hard for me to accept a lot of things, because I'm not used, even though I'm used to it now more, I still spent a lot of years, with the conventional theory in my mind, so it's still hard to get used to. Anyway, we're going to try and break it down in a way that that does that, and avoid the problems that we see in all these groups. And I just I just see so many people, like I said, they're wasting time, money, and their faith. So you got all these fake people, frauds, they're stealing your money, they're promising something and you go there and there's nothing. They promise you something that works and it doesn't work, and I found that that's really bad when all these people fail. Like, these are good people that are sincere, they're trying to do something, and they spend all this money, and they know that there's more out there, but they just can't put their finger on it. And people are taking advantage of that, because people are expecting someone to have it, and so they fall prey to these people who are charismatic, or they, flash around fancy words or something like that. That's unfortunate. So hopefully we'll see a better day, but my goal isn't to change the world to, in this matter, to have huge numbers of people or whatever. I would like to see as many people succeed as possible, but that takes, a more concerted effort. And you really have to want to do it. I think that's the big problem today, is there's a lot of potential, but people don't really focus on it enough to make it happen. So they start with all these projects, for example, and they never complete them, because they don't really know where they're going a lot of the time either. They don't really understand how these things are working, and they're just kind of hoping to accidentally stumble upon them. And one of my big concerns has been the danger of doing that with, especially, look at this. This is, what is that? This one's a 5,000 volt neon sign transformer. Playing around with that. I've got other ones that are bigger. Oh, I saw a guy on YouTube do that. Let me try it. Well, it says there, danger will cause shock, burn, or death. I don't want to see people doing that kind of stuff and hurting themselves. This right here produces about 2,500 volts. And you say, oh, well, Rick, you're just, like, I have to keep it shorted here, otherwise this cap, this 5,000 volt, 4,000 volt cap will blow up if I leave it. I'm not, and this is not the full demonstration, but it's just throwing some parts together here to show it running basically. But you could have an enormous amount of amperage in the system when you hook to ground, and it can be very dangerous. So if people don't understand the basics like we show in this kit, they don't know what they're even really doing. So then they just try anything to make it work, and in doing that they expose themselves to very harmful radiations, and they're easily, when they don't know what they're doing, they're more prone to make a mistake that is very dangerous, because they're kind of being impatient and they just want to see something happen, and they don't know what, and they're messing around, blowing out parts and getting frustrated. I've just seen that for so many years now. That's why in the last couple of years I've really made a concerted effort to directly address that, deal with that problem. So the safety aspect is very important. But again, my bigger motivation is to encourage people to be altogether holistic, altogether independent. Not that they're independently, like selfishly independent, that they can't receive anything from anybody. That's a problem. We need to be able to work together and benefit each other and all that. But I'm talking about being like, as a parent, you're supposed to teach your children to be independent, not dependent upon you the rest of their lives. In the same way, that's the way our culture has moved towards the idea of the professional. The professional this, the professional that, they'll take care of you. You don't have to know anything anymore. You just be your little pawn, be your little peasant that accomplishes your little task, and then is a yes man. Okay, do what you're told, believe what we tell you, and we'll suck the life force out of you. In other words, you're our slaves, and that's a problem, because to submit to that is immoral, is ungodly, and just to be a yes man and never find out the truth and engage in immoral activities because somebody told you, because everybody else is doing that. I grew up with my grandfather and my father were in Nazi Germany during the Second World War, and they actually were not in agreement with Hitler, and actually hid Jews in their homes and all that. So, and my grandfather risked his life to oppose what they were trying to tell him to do, which was to blow up a city or a town or whatever it was. And my grandfather refused and still survived, even though he did that. But in that day, it wasn't, like, we all can understand this analogy, there's no excuse for going along with it. I mean, it definitely cost people their lives to resist it, so it's a very big struggle. But in our day, we have the same sort of thing going on in different ways, more or less serious, well, not really more serious, but just as serious or less serious situations where we just go along with the flow. And these guys, because they're professionals, they're professional doctors, professional lawyers, professional politicians, professional policemen, professional electrician, professional this and that, and there's a justification for it. These people have supposedly done a lot of time and focused in on these things and become an expert, but it's gone too far. There's nothing wrong with being an expert in something or in several things, but we've lost that, what we used to be in America, or North America, for us Canadians too. We've lost that ability to, or that training that you had as a kid where, if you look at these old books and magazines where these kids were learning how to do these various skills, and their father would teach them their trade, and they were more of a farmer atmosphere where, growing up implied that you learned a whole bunch more than today. Now we're a bunch of useless idiots. We may have a whole bunch of information and we can do certain things, but when it comes down to it, what good do we know? Like what good can we do with what we've been trained to do and or become? So my goal is to, like I talked about in the museum video, is to create a better school system. Not that somebody has to go to it, but the idea is what I'm trying to do, is promote. And then this project here, Don Smith, is an example of that. Take this chaos and bring order to it. And not that it's going to be a perfect thing, but I'm going to do what I can do with the gifts that God has given me to do, to work with, and others helping. And there's others, behind the scenes too. But anyway, the point is, I'm trying to move in that direction, and that's kind of what my videos are about. That's what this project's about, and hopefully you can be involved with it somehow or benefit from it. Those of you who are watching this video, and that we can translate that not just to technology. I mean, technology is not the answer for us. But the bottom line, what I am motivated to do this is the core thing that I want to communicate. How to be logical, organized, consistent. These are all important things that we've lost in this culture that's promoting absurdity, immorality, inconsistency, hypocrisy, and all these things are becoming good in people's mind, like, or normal, and everybody's confused. So it's a process you have to go through. And normally what happens is somebody gets awakened to some glaring inconsistency in society, and then they become awakened, if you will. Wow, I can't believe this fact, right? And then they may just dive into that subject and be consumed with it, which often happens. It's almost natural for that to happen. Like somebody gets healthy once they realize all of the junk they're eating and what's happening, how much they're being poisoned or whatever, and they go off onto that like a religion. And then they get consumed with that, obsessed with that. But hopefully they can balance out and at least have that as a trigger to get them to question other things. And I'm not for anti-establishment. I'm not here to promote turning over a society. I'm here to try and promote graceful recommendations. And like I was saying this to somebody the other day, or a couple people the other week. So where are all these environmentalists leading by example? And like I was thinking about these earth shelter homes that I've talked about in the past, and you think, like, okay, if you had a proper earth shelter, okay, you would have virtually no heating and cooling costs. You wouldn't really have any more external repair on your house. You could have a garden or whatever else above your house. Sorry about this, I gotta turn my phone off. And you would have a lot less deaths from hurricanes and tornadoes and all these wildfires. A lot less damage to homes, because the fire and the hurricanes and the tornadoes would go right over if you did everything right. It's another whole subject, but where are people leading by example doing that when it's easy to do? Like, where are these supposed governments that are supposedly alternative, like more liberal mindset, are supposed to be more along those lines? Why aren't they leading by example? Like, what's his doodle? I forget his name now. But anyway, why are all these people not doing that? They're talking the talk and not doing that. And then I would say in the free energy community, why aren't these people that are supposed leaders demonstrating technology or using it themselves? Like the biggest thing was Bedini, which he didn't use the technology at all. And that was a big shocker for a lot of people when they asked me that. I was like, no, he didn't. That's why I tried to show all these different models running and all that at the meetings and that providing kits for that. But where are these people today that supposedly are the experts too? Are they using the technology? By admission, no. So what does that tell you? And so what I'm trying to do is gracefully show people by example as much as I can do. And I don't have any funds, I don't have any money to do this. I just kind of scrape by doing whatever I can without donations or anything like that. I don't get donations, so I'm not opposed to them, but I'm not begging for them either, like some people do. But what I'm saying is, I'm trying to do what I'm capable of doing, and I encourage people to not respond. Like, there's a lot of negativity in people complaining about others and not doing anything themselves. And I think we need to lead by example, not putting pressure upon other people to accept truth. But when we live it out, it's powerful. like you can't change, you're not going to change our governments, whether they're Democratic or Republican. They're all the same. Really, they're the same hat. People, they're just different faces of the same head. You know, whatever. You're not going to change that. It's big money, big business. But if you make a difference in your community, in your family first, in your community, and you lead by example, things will change. And that's the only way to change society for better, is with individuals. You're not going to change, so don't waste your time, and don't get upset and fall into, you know, this rage that is a trap for you. And you know, first clean up your own inconsistencies in your own life before you point the finger at others, and then lead by example. That's what I'm trying to do here. And you know, modest, humble approach. Be realistic. You know, things take time. Jesus took 3 years with 12 individuals plus others, and changed the world, right? Of course, he was a very special individual, but the pattern's there, right? To make those kinds of commitments and that. So that's what I'm trying to do with this. We're still trying to define how it's all going to play out, and we'll, you know, in the next meeting you'll see a lot more. Some of this stuff we only show in the meetings because it takes time to explain it and interact with people, and there's various reasons like that. And but I generally find that if people are not, if they're not committed to it, they're not going to really care about it enough to really see it through, these kinds of experiments and that. And so again, it's a new way of thinking. It's the benevolent over selfish ideas. It's an open system rather than a closed system. You know, it's becoming an experimenter, which is not. It's not going into it thinking I know everything, like so many people like to act. It's I have everything to learn, and we keep opening more and more doors, just like a child is amazed by all the new discoveries. And that's the way we got to approach this, is not be so committed to doing it this one way because this is the way we understand it. It's like, oh wow, I didn't see that before. And that's the exact opposite of what I was expecting. So that's what I want to try and bring out, that humble attitude, that approach. Again, trying to promote systematic, organized thinking, progression, starting at the beginning and working it out. Now, this is not a scripted video. Some of you will criticize me for that, but I wanted to mention something here, just to give you a taste of some things, a little bit demonstrations in that. So, so when I made these capacitors, which is the Don Smith patent, I cut out these, and this is 40,000 volt high voltage wire, high frequency, high voltage wire insulation around here. And what do you think I can do with this, according to the heavy side flow? If you see this, and you see that, again, this is not my point in this video to demonstrate things or talk about them, but it was funny because I ran across, I'll mention this now, I went back to 2004 when I started first interacting with Bedini and Peter Linderman on the internet, and I saw a comment by John Bedini was one of the next comments after my first posting on there. Something along these lines, where he talked about the heaviside flow on the battery wire, or the wire going to the battery after the diode on the what we call the SG circuit type of arrangement. And so he talks about putting a solenoid around the wire and measuring it with the oscilloscope and looking at the waveform. So there's a way of John throwing out information in plain sight. And for those who thought about it more, according to the heaviside current teaching that Bearden talked about, and if you go back to heaviside over 100 years ago, you can, like I brought that out in a previous video, well, then you might be able to see, especially if you look at the Don Smith patent, where this dipole is oscillating back and forth at 25 kilohertz, and the heaviside flow is flowing through these plates. This is just one set. There's not diminished, these plates. So think of these as the battery plates in our motor systems. And that's how you can understand that a bigger battery collects more energy, series and parallel. And so that is more pronounced with high frequency. So this is called the Don Smith effect. Well, actually that's not even the Don Smith effect. So in some of these pages in here you will see the diagram of what he called the DSE, because he said nobody else has named it, so I get to name it. He called it the Don Smith effect, which is a critical understanding of Don Smith that I can see very few people have figured out. They really haven't they don't have any experimental knowledge. This isn't really exactly that, it relates to it. But essentially you'll find that if you have a capacitor and you have a high frequency open loop system on one side of it, it will replicate equally on the other side of the capacitor plate. If you think of the hairpin circuit, as I've talked about, with Tesla hairpin circuit, which I've more appropriately named the Tesla impedance circuit, because it was in his impedance demonstration, but he had two capacitors that the energy was flowing through, supposedly, to the other side of the capacitor. So there's a bar loop that we really have to think of in the form of a one wire rather than the loop, as he presented it in his various teachings. But it's isolated by two capacitors, like it's not electrically connected. So the Don Smith effect is in relation to that, where if you have a true, essentially like an open loop energy source, once you close the loop you lose the effect. So you have to understand, this is what we talk about in this book, really what does it mean to have an open loop as opposed to a closed loop. Now this book is part of the kit, it only comes with a kit, like I said, just to make sure you understand that. You can't get this book by itself. But in a true open loop system was a mystery to me for some years. Even though I was already working with it, I didn't understand what people were meaning by an open loop. I was thinking really it would have to be wireless or one wire, and one wire was still kind of vague to me for some time. But now I get it. You can still have a loop and it still be an open loop. But generally speaking, the Don Smith effect is very, very important. It's one of the things that he did very often. But because people don't understand a true open loop, an open system, they kill because they want amperage, right? And once you have amperage or wattage, you have wasted energy. So, in the purer systems you have no amperage displaying. The amperage is the rate that the load is wasting the energy in a closed loop. So the thing is, in the first parts of the process is you don't want that. At the end, you close the loop with your regular electronics that you're going to run. That's fine. You can waste the energy at that point, because that's the way our system uses the products that we have. So to try and create new products that don't do that is a waste of time right now. So the point is you have to understand those processes in these themes that we talk about in this book, which is dealing with like the idea of a multi-body system as opposed to a single body, and again, resonance and impedance. These are all the themes that you have to understand, and they're not that hard to understand. It's just it's the unlearning that's so difficult, like I said. So anyway, I gave you a little taste. One day I'll get this cleaned up and I'll do a better Benita's presentation of this massive, I mean, look at the interrupter on this. That's one big iron. This is going back to, this might as well have been Daniel Cook's, right out of his patent, with this big, huge iron here. But anyway, that's the plan, that's the purpose, that's the scope, well, somewhat of the scope of what we're getting into. Show all the little gadgets and so forth, that the tools, what's important meters to have. Like this is one of the ones that Don Smith mentioned. Front right out of Radio Shack. You can pick a couple of these up on eBay. It's frequency meter, more for the higher frequencies, but it can still do fairly low frequencies. And, this is a 1,000 times probe. It's one of the cheaper ones that you can get on eBay. So you kind of get what you pay for, but there's different tools that you need. An LCR meter we talked about before, but again, I'm not going to do a YouTube school. There's no respect, and that's not the avenue that I'm pursuing. The avenue is a private thing. If you want to be involved with it, for minimal cost, we'll do that. Like I said, with the publications and with the school idea, course or whatever we're going to do it, that's the avenue I've chosen. That's the avenue that works. That's the avenue that people respect. Oh yeah, some of you might recognize this chart from Don Smith, and it's pretty fascinating, the electromagnetic spectrum. So I thought it would be a good background to show here. You can learn quite a bit from that. So anyway, that's my plan for now, to do this. This summer we'll make more stages, but the first stage of the school and the course is this book, really, and we'll integrate it together. And at the first meeting in Charlotte, North Carolina, coming up beginning of August, Friday and Saturday, meet us there, or in California 2 weeks later. We'll be in near Sacramento area, Central California there, so some people are starting to join up on that already. And I think that covers it. So thanks for watching, and hope this helps encourage people and give some direction, and we'll talk to you later. Oh, the next videos like I said, will be these videos here. We're going to put them online consecutively from 94 to 2006. some of them are already online, but I don't know if they'll ever be pulled down or whatever, so we'll do it here. We'll do a timestamp from the very beginning, and that will correspond to the index. So again, yeah, thank you for watching.